The man standing on my front porch had no right to be alive in my heart. 10 years ago, he had walked out of my life without a goodbye, without a letter, without a single explanation, leaving me to bury a marriage that had never officially ended. I had cried until I believed there were no tears left inside me, rebuilt my life from the broken pieces, and learned to smile again for the sake of my daughter. Yet there he was, dressed in faded clothes with silver beginning to streak through his hair, staring at me with eyes filled with regret so deep they looked heavier than the 10 years that had passed. My hands trembled, my heart pounded against my chest, and for a moment I wondered if grief had finally driven me to imagine impossible things. Before we continue this emotional journey, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who may need hope today, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps these stories reach people who need them most. 10 years earlier, life had felt wonderfully ordinary. I was 28 years old, married to a quiet, dependable carpenter named Rowan Mercer. We lived in a cozy little house on the edge of a peaceful town where children rode bicycles through sunny streets and neighbors greeted one another by name every morning. We never considered ourselves wealthy, but we always believed we had everything that truly mattered. Rowan had a gift for building beautiful furniture with his hands, and I worked as a librarian, surrounded every day by stories that reminded me hope could survive almost anything. We dreamed of filling our home with children, planting apple trees in the backyard, and growing old together on the porch we had built with our own hands. Every afternoon, after finishing work, Rowan would come home covered in sawdust, smiling before he even reached the front door, and somehow the entire house felt brighter the moment he stepped inside. Looking back now, I often wonder if happiness is always quiet before life decides to test it. Nothing about that final morning hinted it would become the dividing line between the life I knew and the life I would be forced to create alone. Rowan kissed my forehead, laughed when I reminded him not to skip lunch again, grabbed his toolbox, and promised he would be back before dinner because he wanted us to look at paint colors for the nursery we hoped to need someday. I watched his old truck disappear beneath the bright blue sky, expecting to see it return before sunset. I never imagined that simple wave goodbye would become the last memory I carried for an entire decade. Dinner grew cold that evening. Midnight came and went. By the following afternoon, panic had settled over every corner of my heart. Friends helped search every road between our town and the construction site where he had been working. The police questioned coworkers, searched nearby forests, and followed every lead they could find. 3 days later, Rowan's truck was discovered abandoned beside an empty roadside parking area nearly 40 miles away. The keys were still inside. His wallet remained untouched. His phone had vanished, and there was absolutely no sign of where he had gone. It was as though the earth had swallowed him whole beneath the afternoon sun. The investigation lasted for months, but every answer only created new questions. There was no evidence of an accident, no financial problems, no secret relationship, and no indication that Rowan had planned to disappear. Some investigators quietly believed he had become the victim of a crime. Others suspected he had chosen to leave voluntarily. Every theory heard in a different way because none of them brought him home. As weeks turned into months, neighbors stopped asking whether there was any news. Their hopeful smiles slowly became sympathetic looks that I learned to avoid. I hated grocery shopping because I could almost hear the whispers following me through every aisle. Some people pitied me. Others judged me. A few believed I must know more than I admitted. The loneliness became almost unbearable because grief has a way of isolating people even in crowded places. 3 months after Rowan disappeared, my world shifted once again. I sat inside a doctor's office, holding a small piece of paper that confirmed I was pregnant. The room seemed to spin around me as joy and heartbreak collided inside my chest. We had dreamed about becoming parents for years, but Rowan was gone before he ever knew our dream had come true. I walked out of the clinic into the warm afternoon sunshine, sat alone on a wooden bench overlooking a quiet lake, and cried until my eyes burned. I wasn't crying because of the baby. I was crying because I realized our child might never know the father who had already loved them without even knowing they existed. Family members tried to support me, although their advice often reflected their own fears more than my needs. Some encouraged me to sell the house and move closer to relatives. Others gently suggested I should eventually remarry because I was still young enough to start over. A few believed raising a baby alone would be impossible. Their concerns came from love, but every suggestion felt like another reminder that everyone else had already accepted Rowan was never coming home. I wasn't ready to let go. Every afternoon I sat on the porch watching cars pass by, secretly hoping one of them would stop in front of our house. Days became months, and every passing vehicle eventually disappeared without slowing down. When my daughter was born, the nurses placed her tiny body into my arms beneath the bright morning sunlight pouring through the hospital windows. She had soft golden hair, peaceful gray eyes, and a tiny smile that somehow reminded me of Rowan before she had even opened her eyes completely. I named her Elodie because the name sounded like hope wrapped inside music. Holding her for the first time gave me a reason to keep moving forward when every part of me wanted to stop. Motherhood became the hardest and most beautiful journey I had ever known. During the mornings I worked part-time at the library while an elderly neighbor cared for Elodie. In the afternoons I cleaned offices and organized books for extra income because every dollar mattered. There were weeks when I carefully counted coins before buying groceries, wondering whether I could stretch one meal into two. I learned how to repair broken appliances by watching instructional videos because paying someone else simply wasn't possible. I sewed tiny tears in Elodie's clothes long before she noticed them because I wanted her to feel cared for, not deprived. I smiled through exhaustion because children deserve memories filled with love instead of worry. As Elodie grew older, she became the brightest part of every day. She loved collecting wildflowers during afternoon walks, reading fairy tales beneath the giant oak tree in our yard, and helping me bake cupcakes that rarely looked perfect but always tasted wonderful. She asked endless questions about everything around her, and each answer reminded me how quickly time was moving. Occasionally she would ask about her father after noticing classmates arriving home with theirs. Those moments were always the hardest. I never wanted bitterness to shape her heart, so I simply told her that her father had loved her before she was born and that sometimes life creates mysteries adults struggle to understand. She accepted those answers while she was young, but I knew the day would come when curiosity would become something deeper. Years continued passing beneath countless sunny afternoons. I celebrated birthdays, school achievements, scraped knees, lost teeth, piano recitals, and every milestone Rowan had unknowingly missed. There were moments when grief returned unexpectedly, like seeing another family laughing together in the park or watching fathers proudly clap during school performances. Still, life slowly became peaceful again. I planted flowers around the cottage after selling our old home because I wanted Elodie to grow up surrounded by beauty instead of memories filled with sorrow. Together we created traditions that belonged only to us. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon picnics, library visits every Wednesday, and long walks through the botanical gardens whenever the weather was warm. Those simple routines slowly healed parts of my heart I once believed would remain broken forever. By the time Elodie turned 9, I had finally accepted that some questions would never receive answers. I no longer waited by the window every afternoon. I no longer jumped whenever the phone rang. Rowan had become a memory instead of an expectation, and although the pain never completely disappeared, it had softened enough for hope to grow around it. Then, on a bright spring morning exactly 10 years after he vanished, everything changed. I had just returned from buying fresh flowers for the kitchen table when someone knocked on the front door. Assuming it was a delivery driver, I casually wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door without hesitation. The world seemed to stop breathing. Standing before me was Rowan. Older. Thinner. His shoulders were slightly bent, and faint scars marked one side of his face, but there was no mistaking those familiar gray-blue eyes. They were filled with tears before either of us managed to speak. My knees weakened so suddenly I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. Every emotion I had buried for 10 years exploded inside me all at once. Relief fought against anger. Love collided with betrayal. Hope crashed into disbelief. For several endless seconds, neither of us moved. Then Rowan lowered his eyes, as though he believed he no longer deserved to look at me, and with tears running silently down his face, he whispered the first words I had heard from him in an entire decade. Those few words changed everything I thought I knew about the past, but they could never erase the 10 years that had already been lost. I stood frozen in the doorway, searching Rowan's face for the man I had once loved. His voice was quieter than I remembered, weighed down by years of pain that showed in every wrinkle around his eyes. He did not step inside or ask for forgiveness. He simply stood there beneath the warm spring sunshine and admitted that he had no right to expect anything from me. He said he only wanted one chance to tell me the truth before I decided whether I wanted him to disappear from my life forever. I looked at the man who had haunted my memories for 10 years and realized that, no matter how angry I was, I deserved answers. I quietly stepped aside, allowing him to enter the home that had once been ours but had become mine alone. The living room felt strangely silent as sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the photographs covering one wall. There were dozens of them, each capturing a moment Rowan had never seen. Elodie taking her first steps. Her first day of kindergarten with an oversized backpack. Birthday cakes covered in colorful frosting. School concerts. Family picnics where only 2 people stood smiling at the camera. Rowan walked slowly toward the photographs, stopping in front of each one as though trying to memorize every year he had missed. His shoulders began to shake, and for the first time since I had known him, I watched him cry without trying to hide it. When he finally found the strength to speak, his story sounded almost impossible to believe. 10 years earlier, the construction company where he worked had unknowingly become involved with a large criminal organization laundering money through fake building contracts. Rowan had accidentally discovered documents proving millions of dollars had been stolen from public projects. Before he even understood what he had found, he began receiving threats. At first, they seemed like meaningless warnings, but within days someone broke into our garage, and another worker connected to the investigation disappeared without a trace. Law enforcement secretly approached Rowan and explained that he had become one of the most important witnesses in an investigation that stretched across several states. They believed the people behind the crimes would target not only him but also anyone he loved. According to Rowan, investigators convinced him that disappearing immediately was the only way to protect us while they built their case. They promised it would only take a few months before he could safely return home. Rowan said agreeing to leave was the hardest decision he had ever made, but he believed he was saving our lives. He was placed under protective supervision, moved repeatedly, and instructed never to contact anyone from his former life. Every attempt to reach me could have revealed where he was hiding. Every letter could have placed us in danger. Every phone call might have undone the investigation. Months became years because the criminal case grew larger than anyone expected. Witnesses withdrew their statements. Court hearings were delayed. Several suspects fled the country. Rowan was relocated again and again under different identities while authorities continued gathering evidence. He said there were countless mornings when he begged to contact me, especially after learning through public records that I had given birth to our daughter. Each request was denied because investigators believed the people involved still had connections capable of tracking him. Rowan admitted there were moments when he almost ignored every warning and came home anyway, but each time he imagined someone hurting me or our child because of his decision, he forced himself to stay away. I listened without interrupting, but every explanation battled against the years of loneliness I had survived. Even if every word was true, I had still spent 10 birthdays explaining to a little girl why her father never came home. I had sat alone during school performances while other families filled entire rows together. I had struggled through illnesses, financial hardship, broken appliances, and endless responsibilities without anyone beside me. Understanding someone's reasons does not automatically erase the pain they caused. Rowan nodded as though he already knew exactly what I was thinking. He admitted that no explanation could ever return the years we had lost. He accepted responsibility for every tear I had cried and every burden I had carried alone. He said he had not come back expecting his old life to be waiting for him. He simply wanted the opportunity to tell the truth and spend whatever years remained trying to become someone our daughter could respect. That afternoon, before Elodie returned from school, Rowan quietly left without asking another question. He only thanked me for listening and promised he would never force his way back into our lives. As I watched him walk away beneath the bright afternoon sky, I realized the anger inside me was no longer as simple as it had been that morning. It was tangled together with sadness, compassion, confusion, and memories I had spent years trying to bury. When Elodie came home carrying her school bag, she immediately noticed something different about me. Children have an incredible ability to sense emotions adults try to hide. I sat with her on the back porch while sunlight warmed the garden we had planted together over the years. For the first time in her life, I told her the complete truth about her father. I explained that he had returned and wanted to meet her, but I also made it clear that the decision would always belong to her. I would never force her to accept someone simply because they shared her last name. She became very quiet. After several long minutes, she asked only one question. She wanted to know whether he had ever stopped loving her. That question broke my heart because no child should ever wonder if they were loved. I answered honestly. I told her I believed he had loved her every single day, even though he had not been there to show it. A week later, Elodie agreed to meet him. They met in the botanical gardens where she and I had spent so many happy afternoons together. The sun shone brightly across the walking paths as flowers bloomed in every direction. Rowan waited beside a wooden bench holding a small handcrafted music box. He had built it himself from maple wood, carving tiny flowers around its edges because he had learned from my stories that Elodie loved gardens. When he saw her walking toward him, his eyes immediately filled with tears. Elodie did not run into his arms. She simply stood in front of him, studying the face she had imagined countless times. Rowan handed her the music box without expecting anything in return. Inside the lid he had carefully carved one sentence. For every birthday I missed, I will spend the rest of my life showing up. Elodie traced the words with her fingertips. Then she looked directly into his eyes and asked why he had never written even one letter. Rowan did not hide behind excuses. He admitted that he had obeyed people he believed were protecting us, but he also confessed that, looking back, he wished he had fought harder to find another way. He admitted making mistakes. He admitted failing her. He admitted that love without presence leaves wounds that apologies alone cannot heal. Something changed in that moment. Not because every hurt disappeared, but because honesty finally replaced silence. Their relationship grew slowly after that. Rowan never tried to become the father he had not been overnight. Instead, he earned trust one afternoon at a time. He attended Elodie's soccer games without expecting recognition. He helped her with woodworking projects for school. He patiently listened whenever she talked about books, friends, or dreams for the future. Some days she laughed with him. Other days she kept her distance. Rowan accepted both with humility because he understood that healing cannot be rushed. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines, unsure what role Rowan would ultimately have in my own life. We spoke often, but our conversations focused on practical things rather than romance. We discussed Elodie, shared parenting decisions, and gradually rediscovered the friendship that had existed long before we became husband and wife. I realized forgiveness is not a single moment. It is a choice repeated over and over whenever old pain tries to return. One sunny Saturday, nearly a year after Rowan came home, our town organized a volunteer project to renovate the local community playground. Families arrived throughout the morning carrying paintbrushes, gardening tools, and picnic baskets. Rowan worked tirelessly repairing broken benches, replacing damaged wooden railings, and building a beautiful new play structure for younger children. He never sought praise. He simply wanted to give something back after feeling that life had already given him far more grace than he deserved. As I watched him helping strangers with the same kindness he had once shown me, I remembered why I had fallen in love with him all those years ago. The goodness inside him had never disappeared. It had simply been buried beneath impossible circumstances and overwhelming regret. Late that afternoon, Elodie walked over carrying a small apple tree the community planned to plant near the playground. She smiled at both of us and asked if we could plant it together. Without saying a word, the three of us knelt beside the freshly dug soil beneath the warm sunlight. Rowan steadied the tree while Elodie carefully covered its roots with earth. I poured the first bucket of water around the base, and for a long moment none of us spoke. We simply looked at the tiny tree standing proudly against the blue sky. It reminded me of our family. Fragile. Scarred. still growing. That evening, after we returned home, Elodie handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a drawing of the three of us sitting beneath a large apple tree many years in the future. Above the picture she had written, "Families don't have to be perfect. They only have to keep choosing each other." I could no longer hold back my tears. For so many years I believed my story had ended the day Rowan disappeared. I thought everything afterward was simply survival. But standing in my kitchen with sunlight pouring through the windows, I finally understood that survival had quietly become healing, and healing had slowly become hope. Before we reach the end of this journey, I would love to hear from you. If you had been in my place, could you have forgiven someone after losing 10 precious years? Please leave a meaningful comment sharing your thoughts and the lesson this story taught you about love, trust, forgiveness, or second chances. Life never returned to the way it had once been, and perhaps that was for the best. We could never reclaim the birthdays that had passed or the memories that had been missed. Those years would always remain part of our story. But we discovered something just as valuable. The future is not built by pretending the past never happened. It is built by facing the truth with courage, extending grace without forgetting the lessons pain has taught us, and choosing love again even when it feels risky. Rowan spent the rest of his days proving that forgiveness should never be taken for granted, while Elodie grew into a young woman who understood that compassion is strongest when it walks hand in hand with wisdom. As for me, I learned that hearts can break in unimaginable ways, yet they can also heal more beautifully than we ever thought possible. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey.